My name is Richard Price. I run the only nursery here in Birdsville. That makes me pretty special compared to most other plant sellers around the world. You see, Birdsville is a desert town where very little grows above ground. If you search for us online, you'll find out why our houses, churches, and supermarkets are all underground. You'll read about our extreme summer temperatures, as high as 125 Fahrenheit sometimes, and the lack of rain. But it wasn't the heat that first sent us underground, no matter what the town council would have you believe. No, the explanation can't be found in nature. Well, not the nature familiar to most people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should start by telling you about the first time I met them. I was 5 years old when it happened. I woke up suddenly from a deep sleep. The house was dead quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Both my parents were fast asleep. A dull glow lit up my room. I had a kid's nightlight thing, a soft plastic illuminated clown in the corner of my room. It was by that light that I first saw them. There were 6 in all, standing at the foot of my bed, as still as statues. Small, gray, little beings they were. I knew they weren't other kids. I guessed they weren't even human, and that terrified me. To my child's eye, they looked like monkeys. Long arms, large heads, round eyes. I still remember the black chasm of their broad smiles. They didn't move. They didn't speak, at least not in the way we do. They projected their sickly, sweet words directly into my mind. What they said, I'll never forget it. They said, "Why do things that go into the earth come out again?" The next thing I remember, my mother was patting my face with a damp cloth. She'd awakened to my screaming and found me unconscious on the bedroom floor. When I described for her what I had seen, she said what you might expect. It was a nightmare. But the next night, they came again. This time they asked how they could get mouths like mine so they could speak, and arms like mine so that they could reach for things. They wanted bodies. I told them to go away and never come back. And you know what? They obeyed me. They vanished instantly, leaving me alone in the glow of the little nightlight. But let's get back to dry, barren Birdsville, because that's what I really want to tell you about. The town isn't underground because of the climate, no. Survival, pure and simple, was what drove us out of the light of the sun. When I was 10, my little sister, Sandra, who had recently died in a farming accident, fell out of the sky. Yes, that's right. Her body fell on us. We just buried her that morning. But a few hours later, there she was, broken and mangled on the little table we had set up with cakes and coffee for the funeral reception. I remember our relatives and friends absolutely beside themselves, screaming and crying out. A few fainted. Some stood in bewilderment, scanning the sky to see where she could have fallen from. The one thing no one doubted was that it was Sandra. There was enough of her intact to say so. My dad and I and a few of his friends gathered up Sandra's body in a tablecloth and laid it in the bed of my father's truck to take her back to the cemetery. When we arrived at the burial site, we found what looked like a bomb crater. Poking through the dirt, we discovered that the lid of the coffin had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Dad said it was like someone had buried dynamite underneath and then hit the detonator. We smoothed out the gravesite and reburied Sandra then and there, wrapped up in the tablecloth. I don't remember much else, just that no one said anything, as if it would be irreverent or disrespectful. so I didn't either. The next morning, Sandra fell out of the sky again. This time she hit the mailman, John Adams, who was on his morning rounds. She landed on him at such a speed that he also died. A few of us got together to bury both Sandra and John. We dug up a different hole in the cemetery for Sandra, thinking that maybe some strange seismic activity was causing the ground to spurt her up. But then they both started falling out of the sky. Sandra and John. No matter how many times we reburied them, or how many new holes we dug for them. Sometimes they fell together, and sometimes separately. Each time they landed, they broke apart, too. First, limbs and heads detached from torsos, then bones tore off from the joints. Eventually, the fragments were so small that we weren't sure anymore which was which. But bones are solid, even broken bones, and lethal when falling from a great height. As a result of falling body parts, other people died in the following weeks. After burial, these bodies too became deadly missiles. My mother was in her car when a body came through the windshield. Some school friends died when a shower of bones hit them on the soccer field. No family was spared. Everyone knew someone had been struck down. The number of dead killed by the dead rose to over 100. It was almost as if the bodies were aiming for the living. Eventually, we stopped burying and reburying bodies. There was no point to it. A deep despair came over the town. At first, people were diligent about fixing the damage caused by falling bodies to the buildings and houses. But as the bodies continued to fall, the living gave up and either left town altogether or took up residence in their basements. It's been said that people can get used to anything. I suppose that's true. The sound of bodies thumping onto the ground, crashing through ceilings, pounding cars, and setting off car alarms. Even the sight of ripped flesh draped over fences and hedges, or raw bones lying on sidewalks and lawns. None of it bothered us after a while. We even grew accustomed to the smell. It became just an ordinary thing to live underground most of the time. Like crabs on a beach, we learned to look up and dodge whenever we went topside. The problem with living underground, of course, is that you run out of things necessary for life, like food, for instance. Every so often, someone had to make a supply run. One day, my dad told me he was going topside for supplies. Though he'd done this many times before, I had an uneasy feeling about it. Sure enough, Dad didn't come back. I wanted to go look for him, but I knew already what I would find. And did I really want to see pieces of him around the neighborhood when he too fell to earth? I remember crying that night for the first time in months. I'd kept a lot of feelings buried inside since my mother's death. That's what people do when survival is their only concern. With Dad gone now, there didn't seem any point to staying strong anymore. I let the tears fall. I kept repeating to myself, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be alone. But alone I stayed until the early hours of the morning. That's when I heard it. Not an exterior sound, you understand, but a voice in my head. A voice that wasn't my own. A strange kind of greeting call. Hungry and tired, I dismissed it. At least I tried to. But the voice was insistent, and there was something familiar about it. I lifted my head to see the 6 little gray creatures standing very still and watching me. The hairless monkeys with the devious grins had returned. I'd been crouching at the bottom of the basement stairs. At the sight of the creatures, I jumped up and fell backwards. The pain I felt from bumping my head on the wall made me realize I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining things, and this was no nightmare. The creatures had addressed me. I now spoke to them. I asked who they were and where they came from. One of them came over to me. He didn't seem to have the use of his limbs. He fixed his round, vacant eyes on me, and I heard in my mind, "If we cannot plant them, we cannot grow them. Will you help us plant them?" I meant to return an incredulous scoff, but surprised myself by answering out loud with a meek yes. Why did I say yes? I'm not sure. Maybe the whole idea of growing things came as a tonic to the horror of the situation. The fact was that I knew more than a little about making things thrive in an arid climate. I was a local kid celebrity for planting and gardening, as a hobby at the time, mind you, that would eventually blossom into a full-time job. I was particularly good at succulents and carnivorous plants and the kinds of things that didn't grow well in arid climates. The local newspaper had published an article about my taking first prize in a third-grade science fair for magical skills with all manner of flora. They even included a photo of me looking up from amidst pots of bushy, thriving plants. Maybe that's how the little gray creatures were aware of my talent. They wanted to grow something. I knew how to grow things. So they came to me. It occurred to me that a purpose had been laid out for me long ago. I had been prepared to be useful at this point in time. The early encounter with these creatures had not been mere coincidence. I motioned toward the germination lights and seedlings on my dresser at the other side of the basement. The little creatures followed me with their empty eyes as I slowly crossed the floor. I told them that in planting anything, they had to be concerned with the nutrient levels of the soil. I explained the importance of water and compost. It wasn't until I started on seed orientation and geotropism that their little round heads started bobbing up and down. They thanked me and then disappeared. A few days later, the bodies stopped falling. In fact, none have fallen for the last 40 years. Not long after my last encounter with the creatures, people started showing up from out of nowhere, it seemed. I mean, people move around all the time, but a town's growth is usually in response to some kind of external stimuli, like an oil or gold discovery, or because an industry is taking advantage of a tax break in the area. But nothing like that happened in Birdsville. There were no mineral finds or new job postings to draw anyone to the town. Yet the population grew, and with the increase in numbers of people came an increase in all aspects of town life. One day we had no theater, and the next day we did. The place has become a hubbub of activity. Those of us who remember the old days, the days of the falling dead, don't complain about the rise in numbers. Who cares where these people are coming from? After all, it's just what this dying town needs.